Okay, let's kick off our session then. Thank you for coming together today to talk about rethinking assessment in the age of AI. And I want to just let you know that this presentation is about how we can best serve you and serve each other in this effort to really think about assessment, how that can most effectively take place after the 2.5 going on 3 years of AI and the continued developments. And as you all know, if you've attended our sessions before, we like to make this as much about the community, the participants as possible. So we've got that active chat going already with introductions. Love that. And know that you can continue to comment and ask questions during. Zach and I will try and attend to questions, but with so many of you, we may not get to all of them. But you can certainly respond and side chat with each other as well. We always take the chat and process that and offer that as a resource in our recap. So feel free to share and share resources, dialogues, things that you've done into the chat. All right. We always make available the recording. We do a recap, which includes the recording and any of the resources that you'll see here today. We'll be offering all of the examples that you're going to see today toward the end of the session. You'll get them all as a collection. So go ahead and sit back and enjoy, and let's learn together. So myself, Brett Christie, I'm VP for Educational Innovations at Alchemy. I've been in that position for 5 years now. Prior to that, 25 years in higher education as faculty and faculty developer at the campus and system level in the Cal State system. And I'm pleased to have Zach Justice with me today, who I've known, I want to say 15 years approximately. Zach is at Cal State Chico, and he's currently Director of Faculty Development. I think it's his third time in that position. And Zach is also a professor of communications. He's been department chair. He's doing a lot of great things at Chico State, but he's also involved in a lot of AI efforts, let's say at the system level and beyond. But he's been sort of a steward, a coordinator of some AI efforts in the Cal State system, trainings and learnings that have been taking place there through a community. So I'm pleased to have Zach here, and I want to just do a quick plug. Zach and his colleague, Nick Janos, they do some great work online as well in their podcast and blog, and I'll just paste those if any of you are interested. So, all right. With that, I think I will keep us going, and you'll hear from Zach in just a moment. Little thumbs up for Zach's podcast. Great. All right, so let's look into the session overview. So we'll start out with what you told us about assessment efforts and challenges. We did a couple pre-poll questions. A large number of you responded. That's great. So we'll do a little bit of a check-in there, and you'll be able to kind of get a sense of what's happening across this community and where folks are. We're also going to base this whole session on what many of you told us a few weeks back in a prior session and how that sort of motivated us to lean into some of these shifts that you're going to see today. And we've got 7 of those shifts that we're going to talk about. We're going to demonstrate a subset of those 7 shifts that came from participant feedback in a prior session. We want to engage with you as much as possible. So again, through the chat, we'll do a Padlet. I think there's going to be some rich information that we'll gain through that Padlet activity, and that'll be available to you beyond the session as well. And that may steer some of your conversations at your campus. And our examples that we pick, we try and pick different discipline types, assignment types, and course level types. We can't represent everything, but we've got a good snapshot for you today, and you'll have access to all of those. All right, so let's jump in and look at what you told us in one of the pre-poll questions. So we had 706 people respond. We did this through, I think, Tuesday morning. We've now, I think, got 950 or more registrants, but this is a great subset we decided to run with. And we asked your approach to assessment in light of AI. And we had 89 of you. And before I talk about the numbers, is I actually took out the not sure, non-applicable, the NAs, because I know not everybody's doing assessments firsthand. Some of you might be instructional designers, and that's not something you're doing firsthand. You might be administrators, you might be CTL directors. So I'm concentrating more on the 572 or so that were in the top 4 bars there. And with that, about half said they're making targeted updates to individual assignments. That's great. Some are doing no or minimal changes to existing assignments. And then you've got a group that's definitely leaning in, about a quarter that are really leaning into multiple assessments that have been significantly redesigned And you can share some of those efforts if you want to. That's a lot of good work that some of you are doing for sure. But everybody is pretty much on the pathway. This is, of course, a biased sample because you've all decided to attend a webinar related to AI and assessment. You're not blocking it out. You're coming to participate and learn or share, and that's great. A smaller subset, about 8%, you've got it integrated into nearly all assessments and expectations. So those folks would really be able to share a lot if you want to of any of your examples as we go forward. Okay, looking at the next one.
Yeah, thanks so much, Brett. And I was surprised at this poll result, but after what you just shared about this being a group that's self-selecting in, it makes a little bit more sense. But it helps us get to know you a little bit better and understand that you are integrating artificial intelligence into your current assessment design. And one of the things that we seem to be grappling with the most is maintaining academic integrity while allowing for responsible AI use. And I think it's awesome that so many of us are there. And now we have to sort through the details of what does it mean to inform students about how to responsibly use AI. As a quick aside, I recently hosted a panel of students, and one of the things they were talking about was their instructors tell them they need to responsibly use AI, but then oftentimes don't tell them what that means. And so that's one of the things that I know that we'll have to grapple with in higher education broadly is defining that down so that we can inform students about what our expectations actually are rather than just always using those buzzy terms. I was not surprised at the second most popular result because that's the thing that I most oftentimes hear at my home institution, which is that there's just a lack of time and faculty capacity to do the hard work, not only of designing these things up front, but then also dealing with what oftentimes seems like an increased grading load of, or at least a changed grading load in terms of what it is that we're evaluating. How is it that we can scale things up into larger groups? And then we had less popular but significant hits also for student over-reliance on AI tool use and limited campus-wide understanding of AI's potential and limits. And those definitely resonate with the on-the-ground experience that I'm having working with faculty and leadership at Chico State. And I think that those things resonate throughout the system. And I'd imagine for most of us, well, we may have clicked on one thing for greatest. All of these things are factoring into a matrix of challenges that we're facing when dealing with assessment and generative AI. We're hoping to meet some of those challenges or at least come partway in our webinar today. Back to you, Brett.
Awesome. Thanks, Zach. I was thinking the same thing. Another option could have been doing sort of a weighting or ranking of these five, if you will. That would be another interesting way of looking at it because they're all experienced simultaneously. Great. So let me set a little bit further context, getting into the topic more deeply. We'll stay high level for just a moment. We won't be theoretical for long. We'll get into the nitty gritty soon. But just to give a little bit more framing and some good work that's out there. The session itself, so about a month ago, we had a webinar that about 400 people attended, and this was AI on campus, building fair, transparent, and forward-thinking practices. And let me move my video here. That was, July 30th, so a little over a month ago. And in analyzing that webinar and what participants talked about, we came up with these 7 themes today. And so that was part of the recap that we had from that session that you could always look at if you're interested and didn't attend. You could also look at the article that frames those 7 approaches, but then the article that I wrote back then is what we're springing forward from into today's session to get into some more active components and examples. So that's just some background on there. This is participant informed. This isn't just in our heads. We're trying to really tap into what people are thinking about. Yeah, and we can get to the links in the chat there. Okay, so let's talk more about assessment or Zach, you're gonna talk about this one.
Yeah, thanks. Quit trying to steal all my slides, Brett. So yeah, we want to take a minute and talk about sort of how is it that we're here? At the highest level, what is the challenge that we're facing when we're trying to evaluate whether our students are learning? And the first piece I appreciate the framing of this so much because the greatest risk that we have is maintaining the status quo as if nothing has changed. And we all know that some of us have engaged in this, that it's been, while it seems fast, it does also seem slow at the same time to see faculty and universities come around to realizing that things need to change. But our greatest risk is sitting still while the rest of the world is moving. And it's not a singular risk, right? There are challenges with the integrity, not just of individual classes, but entire degree programs. And also the reality that students may be completing a coursework or a program of study and not having the requisite skills or knowledge upon completion that we would expect and that their future employers expect. There is the fundamental challenge that generative AI changes the relationship between teaching, learning, and assessment. At the most basic level, we assess student learning, and typically we do that by having students complete tasks and then use those tasks both as a way to build understanding, to build capacity, and also then we assess those tasks as evidence of whether or not students have learned. And depending on your discipline or how you teach, there may be a whole array of tasks that then we're assessing on the back end. One of the things that I like to point out with this is that oftentimes generative AI points out problems that already existed just as much as it creates a different set of problems. And something that I've had to be honest with myself and had some awkward conversations with colleagues about is that there were some ways that this perhaps wasn't working well, even in the era before generative AI and even before the COVID-19 pandemic. We've sort of romanticized 2019 era education and erased out of our memory the industrialized academic dishonesty from Chegg and Course Hero, the fact that asynchronous online instruction, we already didn't know whether students were completing their work on the other end. And so, as Brett and I go through some of the possible solutions or different paths forward, I think it's important to keep in mind that it's not like we had this all locked down at the start. That when we look back nostalgically on the time before the pandemic and before generative AI, we need to recognize and be honest with ourselves that that was a flawed time too, and that we weren't always having the lineup in between the assessment of student learning and student learning actually happening. There are opportunities for innovation. And of course, this is the thing that we get the most excited about. There is the chance for students to do more than they've ever done before, and a chance for us to learn alongside them and sort of become novice learners with a technology for the first time, perhaps since we entered college. The stakes, however, could not be any higher. It is increasing. Workforce readiness isn't the only reason why students attend college, but it is a big reason why students are at university and colleges, is to be better prepared for the workforce, to enter into a field where they know that they can have social mobility as well as economic security. And if we aren't aligning what the student learning with how we're assessing it, and if we aren't sure that they know what they need to know and have the capacities that they need upon graduation, they will not be ready for a workforce that they're entering, especially as the workforce and the workplace continue to change. Something I oftentimes emphasize is that generative AI has changed more than our classroom. It's changed the world that students are living in and entering, and we have to prepare students for that world, not the one that existed 5 or 10 years ago. And then the last point here is about the institutional stakes around academic culture and faculty engagement. And if you're in a leadership role in your unit on campus or an informal leader, so much of the work in terms of generative AI and assessment has to do with framing this the right way for the faculty that you are trying to get on side. That we need to keep in mind their disciplinary expertise. We need to keep in mind that they are used to and their knowledge and expertise being at the center of the institution. And so much of the work here is partially about informing, but it's partially around framing this the right way so that faculty remain engaged. Brett, back to you.
Awesome. Thank you. And great conversation going on in the chat at the same time as well, related to student, their situations, excuses, realities. And so, yeah, how do we check in on that and how do we account for that? Not just give or bend, but certain things into consideration and build other things in the best that we can. All right. So let's talk briefly about types of change needed in a time of AI. So looking at discursive changes, and that's a category, and I'll give you the resource for this, the reference for this. It's a really good one, recent one that's coming up in just a moment. But in just thinking about that category of discursive changes, and this is something that happened early on where we thought, okay, we need to have right now a campus policy. We need to start working toward course policies. What are guidelines? What sorts of instructions do we need to create? Um, we need to think about compliance. That was certainly from a student compliance aspect, and detection will come up as well. But there was no change to the actual task mechanics or the experience or the assessments. It was really just based on words and policies, and then relying on hopefully detection being there to back things up, or that honesty was going to magically take place. So that's one category of changes. And there are certainly things there that are necessary, but it's a limiting space to stay in for sure. And we're going to lean more into structural changes, which is where you're going to look at altering the format, the actual process, or the conditions of the task that students are going through, those assessments. You're going to try and build in that validity. You're going to try and build in accountability. There's going to be much less reliance on compliance because you're focusing on the process. You're focusing on student accountability and engagement in the process. And AI can be a presence, but you're going to make that transparent, and you're going to, again, build that accountability for the learning process and the outcomes and what students are submitting. So that's just a quick framing what we wanted to do, and talk about being planted in one place versus the other, and really trying to make that shift into the more structural changes, down to the assessment experiences. And of course, tipping to Corbin Dawson and the wonderful Danny Liu, who's been on here a couple times, and the work that they did for this meta-analysis. And I've got the link that we'll put into the chat for you. This is a very recent article. If you are interested in a very recent podcast, I think from about a week ago, that features Danny Liu as well, and he talks about much of this. So that's a great resource. Okay, so some framing to think about as we start to go forward. The one other piece that I really like that came up recently that I want to think about, because it applies to a lens that we might put and keep as we think about these assessments going forward, is how do we keep the friction in learning? That's building that cognitive muscle where we want students to struggle. And we want them to struggle in, a balanced way. We want all students to have some struggle. We want to make sure that it's not something that's going to be a barrier to certain students, but they should all have this friction they experience going through the process. And we don't want AI to just short circuit or go around that friction or that learning. So we need to design the assessments where that's still going to create some struggle. Doesn't have to be painful struggle, but where are they going to critically reflect and analyze and then show the results of that? So how do we retain that? So if you're interested, there's a link to Michelle's blog from, again, about 2 weeks ago, very recent. And she's done a lot of good work, particularly related to writing, and she's also been on our series as well. And again, touching one more time on the enforcement illusion is, policies are at that structural level. There's some people use the traffic light and think that that's going to make a huge difference, but you have to really think about how your assessment is in its particular red, green, or yellow, and why and how and what the students are experiencing. You just can't say no AI or all in AI. There has to be something about the learning process and accountability factored in. There's nothing magical. You can use this as a starting point. You can use this to categorize things, but it's not going to serve you very deeply if it's just red, green, and yellow. Okay. Okay. So for our 7 themes, these discursive changes alone are fragile. So we're trying to lean more into the structural elements that we're going to show you in a moment. We want to make these assessments more resilient. And that's meant to be a positive term, meaning that the resiliency is going to stand up to the process and taking students toward the outcome. And again, not have that short circuiting or shortcutting take place. We're looking at some actionable strategies to think about structural thinking and course level design and how that takes place. We'll look at 7 themes, but let me back up. The 7 themes that came up from that session about a month ago, we're going to give you 4 examples. The other ones we're going to glaze over briefly. We're going to prop them up, show you what was said, and talk about them in context very briefly. But we're just going to focus on 4 for time purposes, for cognitive load purposes, also because there is some overlap across these 7 themes. There are some common elements, and we wanted to lean into the 4 that we thought we could stand up good examples for or make the best use of time with. Okay, so pausing now for Zach and myself to get you to share a little bit about ways your assessments have changed. We talked about the level of change earlier in the poll, but let's talk about ways or methods your assessments have changed. We've got the link in the chat coming, and I will stay here with the QR code for anybody who may need that for just a moment, and then I'll join you all in the Padlet Live. Okay, so for QR code folks, I'm going to jump now. And let's go ahead and look at, so, and what you'll want to do is click the plus that's at the top of the respective column where you feel your efforts best fit. Minimal or no design, small adjustments, significant redesign. You're integrating AI intentionally, meaning that AI is a part of the process. You're not just redesigning it maybe to be resilient against AI or limit it, but you're actually making AI a part of the learning process. It's a tool that students are using in particular ways. Are you leaning in more into authentic and real world assessments to try and, again, lean into the process and the meaning of the learning and tying it into, let's say, later application, workplace application, and otherwise? If you're considering changes you haven't done yet, you can list those in the far right column. I'll keep refreshing here, and we'll pause for a couple minutes because I know these are big questions. And we'll just look at some of these. Teaching students how to write a prompt to get them the information they need. Prompting is a very important skill, and it can be a learning process. You can have them start out and do prompting and look at the results and analyze those, and they can start to see some of the weaknesses maybe in their prompting, and they can refine that. You can have them go through that process on their own. You can also provide them a prompting framework and provide them examples if you wanted to get them to the best results more quickly. So you can think about that balance of trial and error, or whether you want to just model something for them. Yeah, we'll be touching on some of these for sure. I'm distracted by the names: timid turtle, observant eagle.
Brett,
Swapping
one thing
midterm. Good, Zach. Just real quick, while I see it, swapping a written midterm for an oral exam. So we're coming at you with something like that here in a few minutes.
One thing I'm noticing and I really love seeing is all the we language that is showing up in these responses, which indicates that you aren't just telling students what to do, you're also sharing with them how it is that you're going to be using it and why it is that that should be the case. I recently asked a group of students, your instructor probably has an AI policy. What's your policy for them if you could write one? And it seems like as a group, we're sort of engaging with students rather than just telling them, which is absolutely awesome. Important first step.
Love it, love it. Yeah, because often there may be this no AI policy, but then it becomes obvious that the instructor is using it extensively, and maybe not even knowing that that's obvious to the students. Yeah, Zach always comes up with great ideas, great statements. I love that. Great. Well, we won't be able to go through all of these, but I love what you're sharing here. And you'll see many of these reflected in the examples that we're going with in just a moment. But you've got so much more than we're going to cover today. So that's why this is so important to offer something like this as a resource across the group. Let's see. Okay. Looking at right-hand columns. Yeah, using AI to peer review a draft lesson plan, having it to help you really level set that lesson plan, making sure that it's the best for the learning outcome that you intend based on the content, et cetera. And if you're in college education, then maybe you're modeling that for your teacher candidates as well, which is important. That becomes a valid tool for them and an important tool for them.
And, because workload always comes up in these things, I love to see the example about how it is that you can use these tools to offset some of the other changes in work. And I know that Brett and the Alchemy team have propped up several webinars about incorporating AI into different parts of teaching and learning workflows. Definitely worth a view in the archive if you're looking for some concrete examples about how it is that you might leverage some of these tools to free up time in some areas to make time for the most important parts of teaching and learning with your students.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for that. And I'll also be premiering a new tool that we have that I won't say much about at the moment, but we've developed a lot of tools to help streamline processes for instructors. I'm just hanging on your student policy for instructor AI. And it made me think of Michelle Pacansky-Brock, and she always talks about how her syllabus always includes what I expect of you and what you can expect from me. And I really like how this plays into that approach, into really connecting with your students and that humanizing approach again. All right, for time purposes, let's get back to the examples because we're gonna have to really push along here to get through some of these. So rethinking in those 7 themes, let's look at the first one from product to process. So that was a general theme across many of the themes and across as a whole, is how can you shift things to be more process oriented in learning? And that's not something that AI created. That's been a focus for a long time, is that learning is a process. It shouldn't be product driven. It shouldn't be these high stakes assessments. So you'll see that show up in multiple ways as we go forward. You can see what people told us, documenting steps rather than just grading the final papers. How do you break it up into parts? Process journaling, drafting, iterative checkpoints, all of those are great things. Maybe even learning alongside chatbots through their development and comprehension of the topic. And then assessments that analyze thinking and how they developed that thinking. So you can see an example or a mention of some of the instructor takeaways there. And then making things more authentic even when AI is present. Oh, Zach, did I steal from you?
Yeah, it's all
I
right.
did. I did.
I'll,
Go into
I'll,
the example. So we've got so much back and forth. That's
no, it's
all on
it's
me.
it's quite all right, Brett. And I know we're short on time, so I didn't want to cut you off while you were in the flow. But what I just want to make one more point that connects with something we talked about earlier in the why it matters, and that's that. Again, some of us, and this is me included, thinking back to the last times that I had been in the classroom, we weren't great about this. If I can just speak for myself, I wasn't great about this always, and I outsourced some of the making sure that students were going through the steps to technology features like Turnitin. And one of the things that generative AI has compelled, and I think that this is a layer on top of everything that we saw in the Padlet, is that we need to be telling students why. We need to be telling them why it matters that they engage in a chatbot this way or don't engage in a chatbot. This is why we need to do it in person in class. And some of us are quite out of practice with that because we haven't had to for a long time. But we have to be able to tell students why that it matters if we even want to entertain the possibility that they are going to be engaged in the process and understanding that it is a part of their learning. And again, this isn't just a piece of learning for higher education. I quite literally had this conversation with my 10-year-old last night when I was helping her with her homework, telling her why it was important that she struggled and went up against and struggled to get through it rather than just me stepping in to help. Let's go to the next slide, Brett, and we'll stay on time.
Great. And the why part to me always speaks to the affective domain, which I think is so undertapped in teaching and learning. And so I love to hear that. And I love seeing the side chat there. Okay, Zach.
Yeah, so we built out a particular example of this, and we have a whole folder of these, and the link will be available at the conclusion of the webinar. But we wanted to give people really concrete examples of what this might look like to shift from product to process. So in this particular example, and we'll show that to you momentarily and just breeze through it. Students maybe discuss and create a rough draft of their paper, perhaps even an outline. And if you're teaching in person, that can be in class work. They complete a peer review draft of writing assignments. So then that helps them put them in the chair of the evaluator, not just of the creator. And then you might prompt an AI tool to review those same drafts. It's on the student to critically reflect and assess on both strands of feedback. And that's so important because then that helps them understand the limitations of AI or some of the areas where it's strong. And I know that came up in chat a couple minutes ago. And it's so important that then students don't just use the tools, but also understand their strengths and limitations. And then they revise findings and relevance to go along for their goals and their audience. One of the global things that I just want to be clear about with the examples that we have and the ones that we'll go over is that many of these things you may look at and think, oh, well, I could have an AI do this, or students might be able to get an AI to do a part of that. And all that's absolutely true. We are in a world of partial solutions. And we think that the assignment guides that we have propped up here are good ways to thread the needle in between having students do all of their own work and sometimes having an AI and also illustrating limitations about AI. But I don't think any of us are under the illusions that in the context of this webinar that we have found the 7 silver bullets to make sure that authentic assessment is always happening in classrooms. Brett, I hope the attendance doesn't drop off by half right after I said that, but I want to be honest with them. What you're seeing on your screen now is a full assignment guide and process guide that we have spun up about this particular assignment as an example that you might operationalize within the context of your own university and discipline. So it includes an instructor guide, implementation tips, and critically, some grading advice along with a set of student-facing instructions. Obviously, these sort of things are best if they are tailored and implemented within the parameters of your own discipline and your own classes. But we think that this is a step-by-step guide that can get you started in helping direct students' writing work to be more process-oriented and less product-oriented. Kevin Roos from the New York Times has this nice metaphor about some things are weightlifting and some things are forklifting. And if you take a forklift to a gym, you don't really see any results. And sometimes it's on us then to explain to students why it is that this is a weightlifting tool where the process is important and not a forklifting tool where you can just use something else in order to get the result that you're looking for. All right, Brett, I've taken up too much time. I'm afraid we're off schedule again.
I'll get for each of these, you'll see the same framework here as far as, again, the context around it, and then the implementation guide, and then the student-facing instructions that you would be able to adapt for your learning management system. This one, I want to make sure we give credit to Anna Mills and the folks that she works with. She works within a grant that's based at UC Davis and is across the 3 2-year and 4-year systems in California. They're doing some great work with this model for writing and reflection. Okay, going back to the slides, and I'll get into the next example, and you'll get the link again and the collection here at the end. So talking about transparency and AI reflection. So this, you can have students do log their prompts, log the outputs, keep the chat records, capture those. You can have them do recorded annotations or narrations over that. Portfolios is another way. Oops, excuse me. I'm going to keep it at this level of view for just a moment because I'll go into the example here. So this is about how you can take a process with students and have them develop something like a portfolio or a dossier. This would be something that's a bigger lift as a project. It's more long-term. It could have multiple stages, but it's an end product that they are developing across those stages. And so this is one that I have here as an example that I've found out about, the annotation dossier. And if you wanted to, you could look at that example. That one's from Tracy Lassiter at University of New Mexico Gallup. And so we've got the link there for you on that one. That one, you just want to make sure as you're having students go through their research process and they're developing the portfolio or dossier, whichever you want to call it, along the way, they're getting articles. They could have some AI summaries, but they're actually annotating what they're learning along the way through the research, through the AI interpretations, how it's helping them discover things, how it's helping them analyze things or summarize things. but they have to do, in her case, written reflections and gather those. And to make this manageable as far as hard copy versus digital, students can use free tools to take a photo. If they just use Apple Notes function, they can use that free app to take a photo and load that into their portfolio and submit that. We have to, with something like this, a caveat is you have to be mindful of time load and cognitive load by adding that process on. Do you maybe streamline it to less resources, less artifacts, or something like that? How can you keep it as a manageable process and keep the focus on the learning that's taking place, not the managing of it and creating all these extra layers? So balancing that out. And so Tracy's got some good examples of how she's doing that in her blog article. And that was one that came up through a recent podcast that I went through. So going on to the next one, back to you, Zach.
Great, thanks so much. And I insisted on taking this one. My background, academic training is in communication studies. So when I first started running workshops for faculty and seeing them return to the idea of oral and embodied assessments as an add-on or as a replacement for existing assessments, I got so excited because I was like, oh, it's time to dust off all that Greek literature that I read when I was in graduate school, and here we are. So here's why this matters. AI absolutely excels at written outputs, and we knew this from the start. This isn't a new development with ChatGPT 5. Creating written outputs, especially stuff like outlines, is stuff that these systems are so incredibly effective at. Live demonstration shows what students can actually do and where they're actually at in the learning process. And that is critically important. And so, as we're going to see, this can take a couple of different forms. But the idea of this is that it creates a different system of accountability for students when they know, not just when they do the stand up and answer questions, but when they know that they will have to engage in question and answer or an embodied assessment. So educators in the last Alchemy webinar talked about a lot of different approaches, one of which is modeled in the exam that we have, the idea of doing a mini TED Talk along the way. And this is what you're going to see in what Brett's scrolling through now is the actual applied approach. So this leverages a format that students are already familiar with because a lot of them may not have watched hour-long lectures for fun, but almost all of them have seen a TED Talk at some point. And those sort of pieces, that's a familiar format, but because they are in front and actually having to do some of the work and sort of show accountability for some of the work, it means that they are engaged with it in a different way. Now, one thing I know from teaching lots of oral communication classes is that there are always challenges with scale in this, and that the one of the things that I want to suggest, especially if you haven't taught classes with a large oral component, is that you can group students together and have them do work as a team, and then that is a way that you can take what was a group written project, make it a group oral project, and also limit the amount of class time that that takes up. And there are limitations with this approach, like is showing up in the chat. If you're teaching a 100% online asynchronous course, this is a much more difficult solution to a very common problem. But as I previewed earlier, not all these solutions and shifts work for all different formats and all different situations, but they are viable alternatives. Brett, I know we want to make sure that we have time for the other pieces. Do you
Yeah,
want to move ahead?
let's do that. And yeah, I'm glad the question came up about asynchronous. We had factored that in, but it does add another layer of complexity. Okay, so you'll have access to that resource as well. Let's go into looking at the next one, persona interaction use case. This is great because if you assign students a reading, whether it be more autobiographical or just in general about a topic, then you can have them actually interact with a persona involved in a significant figure of that topic. Could be the source or could be a source that's significant related to that topic. So let's go ahead and go into the persona shift example. So for each of these, again, we frame it about the shift, why it matters, benefits, and instructor takeaway. So this example is conversing with Rachel Carson. This comes from my main institution where I worked, Sonoma State. We were very proud to have a Carson Hall based on her work. And so this is something that you can have students actually converse with Rachel Carson about some of the environmental issues and work that she did to make some really big changes, particularly in the 60s. And so by going through this experience, students can do the reading that they've been assigned for the course on Silent Spring, but they can actually then have a conversation about the context and then actually get responses from the persona and then analyze the experience, analyze the responses that were received. How much of that was in line with what they read? Was there anything that stood out as inaccurate or awkward? And students are actually designing questions. You're preparing them, you're having them prepare 5 to 7 questions to ask, and they can submit those ahead of time. They're given a prompt. I have a more detailed prompt in the student instructions, and so I'll scroll down to that. There's a starter rubric. We didn't do a detailed rubric for these, but just to give you a range of what good versus developing performance might look like in this type of experience. So jumping down to the student facing. So again, you're propping them up with the purpose, you're giving them the assignment task and breaking it down into steps. Here's the prompt that they can use. And you can put in the name of the course in the middle there, but that's the prompt that they can use. And you could always see a prompt like this and substitute it for a different reading, a different context based on your discipline. But this will give you a sense of how that can be propped up. And then the 5 to 7 questions that they would use to interact through that persona. If you wanted to have Rachel Carson interact with some of today's topics and use the knowledge from the 60s, you can change the prompt slightly. But in this model, it's keeping it contained to the 1960s era of her work during her lifetime. And then here's how they would analyze the process, submit their work, and what the grading criteria would look like for them so that it's transparent. Okay, so that's a quick example there. And one more quick example, and then we'll get into our new tool that we're sharing out today, that we're launching today. So if we're looking at authentic and case-based assessments, which is a great thing to lean into for multiple reasons, not just AI, then I'll give you an example here of where we can look at a brand identity analysis. So let's jump to that example, because of course, students could just rely on AI to say, okay, analyze this for me and give me this brand identity analysis. What you're doing along the way, and let me scroll down to the student instructions where you can see in action, we'll pass by the framing here, is you're having students either physically go to a store, retail, or some sort of business and look at their brand identity and their presence and how they present themselves to customers or clients, whatever it may be. And they're taking pictures, and those are going to be digital pictures, and you can require them to selfie themselves in the pictures depending on where it's being posted, but that's an option. But you're actually having them at the physical store location and interacting. Maybe they're going to ask questions of somebody who's there, and that's something you could add to this assignment. If it's a website, they can do that as well. They can do a thorough analysis of the brand website. The way that you can try and subvert AI is you can have them do a recorded annotation, and it's their voice, it's their markups, it's different things like that. So that's an option. Agentic AI is going to be able to do some of those things, but if you have enough sources that are traced to the student, you can count on some authenticity there. And then they'll submit a combination of a written report or narrated recording, photos, screenshots, etc. So you've got multiple artifacts that are process driven, also learning driven, and then artifact and accountability driven. So that's a look at a possibility there for a brand identity analysis. Okay, let me jump back here. We're almost caught up. I'll look at the 2 other themes briefly, but again, time purposes and all of that, we're going to go skim over those. Number 6, navigating institutional constraints. We talked about that at the beginning. Zach had some good high-level framing for it. We had some poll results that kind of reflected some of that time and capacity is a big deal for this. The learning curve that it takes, and eventually getting to the place where it pays off, that there's a time savings and there's a benefit to teaching and learning by being deeply steeped in some of this. But that is a big learning curve. Some people are reverting back to blue books. You may have seen the article in New York Times or the opinion piece in New York Times yesterday. Lively discussion. There were about 2,000 comments when I looked at it within hours of its release. So some people are going back to the blue book measure and just trying to flip back again to 2019 and prior. You have to think of why you would be doing something like that, and is there an alternative? Does that benefit students? Does that benefit you? But first of all, does that benefit students in the learning process? There are some built-in traps and things to look out for with something like that. Assessment by learning type. So the more you can dig into the learning outcome and the better you can align the assessment type, the more successful you're going to be in creating some sort of experience that accounts for or intentionally incorporates AI. So really rethinking what that means as far as the learning process and the outcome. There's no one size fits all proposition. So really rethinking that. What are the assessment methods and responses in light of AI? So we've tried to give you some examples today across those 4 areas. Okay, let me transition a little bit. And we prepared some of those examples. You can think about how you might adapt or adopt some of those, or what thinking did it hopefully give you to think about what you could create. But what we're always trying to do is think about, okay, how could we create tools to enable people to do things more efficiently and more effectively, so that not everybody has to become an expert in AI, an expert in assessment. Hopefully you become very proficient at those things, but again, it takes time. And we know not many faculty were necessarily trained as assessment experts, and it's a learn as you go type thing, and sometimes that could be a limited experience. So we've developed a tool. We have this new assessment transformation optimizer. And we've developed many of these optimizers, and what they're designed is they're tools, templates, or wizards where you can come in as an instructor or a designer. You can come in and you're given a series of prompts, and you'll see that in just a moment, and you're able to respond to those prompts that are contextual elements about the experience for you or your students. And so for this, it's related to assessments. And so you're giving it context about the course, the outcomes, and what you hope students gain through the experience. And through this optimizer, and I'll switch to the live screen now. And you'll have to excuse me because I'll do some copy and pasting so you know this isn't just the magic 8-ball happening here. So here's where you would land on this assessment transformation optimizer. And this one's designed to help you take traditional or more high stakes assessments and how to rethink them to be more formative and process oriented. And that's how it's built. And so what you would do is give some of the current assessment information. And so I'm going to go ahead and copy and paste some of that. And I will stumble a little bit in clicking back and forth between my screens, but trust me, it's going to be a lot better than watching me stumble typing, 20 to 200 characters at a time. So I'm pasting in these elements, as you can see. I'm going to give it some information about the modality. Let's just say in person for this one. What are some key learning outcomes? I'm going to just prop up some of those and paste them in here. We always like to account for the modality of the course, and you'll see in a moment we also like to account for intended level of AI use. And that's where I'll talk about it when we get to it. But I know it's related to a comment that came up in chat earlier. So what are your goals for rethinking this assessment? I want to make the assessment more authentic and applied. I want to promote real world application. I want to increase student choice. I want to allow for collaborative work. You can select one or several of those. So this is the AI assessment scale that came up earlier, which I think is a good framework to start with. And I think Perkins et al. Have done great work in 23 and 24 in putting this out there and creating a dialogue. And what could this look like if you were to say no AI versus full AI, or AI collaboration, or AI just at the planning stages? I'm going to say AI collaboration and just kind of hit the midpoint on this so you can see where it lands. And then from there, if you click next, you'll pause because behind this, there's AI happening, and it's taking this context and it's taking what it's been trained on as far as alternative and authentic assessments compared to high stakes product oriented assessments. And it's analyzing and trying to give the user three examples to consider. And it can take a moment because that's a lot to process. Think about the work you would have to put in to go searching for new ideas and going out on Google and trying to figure out, okay, what's the best way to look for? Is it authentic assessments, alternative assessments, process oriented, doing all of that, finding the best resources, and then trying to hone in, print, process and synthesize and hone in, and then start creating and building. This is designed to take you to the iteration, take you through the iteration phase pretty quickly. It won't come up with anything perfect, but it'll give you some really good ideas. And then we have other optimizers that can help you to take one of these ideas and shape it even further. But does a good job of giving you assignment one suggestions. So a marketing strategy simulation project could be one thing for this group. A consumer behavior analysis presentation, and then the last one is an ethical marketing case study journal. So hopefully that gives you a sense and you would be able to look at this more closely. You could regenerate. You can grab any of these and edit them, but I'm going to go ahead and click review. And it's a little bit more readable in this format. But at any stage in this point in the process, you would be able to edit, or you would be able to go to simply say finish and have the end product. If I click complete, then that work is saved and it goes into your portfolio. As a user coming in, you would be able to have a portfolio automatically created for you, where you could then have these different optimizer outputs that you've created that you can use in your different courses. You could also share the link with a colleague, whether you're co-teaching or somebody in your department, you could do something like that. Each of these comes with an implementation guide to help you think through the strategies of how to most effectively prepare and implement and assess these types of experiences. It also, each of these has a rationale statement that has when, why, and how you would use something like this, some research backing behind it for those that are interested in looking deeper. So that's our new tool that's designed to help people rethink, to transform some of their high stakes traditional assessments, break them down or rethink them into something that's more process oriented or authentically based, if that makes sense. Any feedback, comments, or reactions related to that? So Sophia, thank you for that. So this is something, we have a freemium access where you would be able to use a number of these tools, these optimizers. But in our platform, we also have a lot of free or open access resources. So this one here, you would be able to use this assessment transformation optimizer and a few others. You would also be able to have continued free access to the open access resources, like these shifts that we showed you today in this webinar, the 4 shifts. Those documents are open access and continually available. So great question. I'm going to, and we're wrapping up here in the next couple minutes. I'm going to jump back to the slides and into show. And then what we can do is get you the link here in just a moment, but let's hold off. And I want to check the chat again with just a couple moments we have here at the end to see any other questions or comments that we can engage around. And I understand people need to go for the next hour. That's great. And a final time, I'll emphasize that the recording, the recap, and all the resources will be sent to you as a registrant. Thank you for your participation. Thanks, Zach, for the feedback. I had shared, Zach, what we're up to with this assessment transformation optimizer, and he seemed pretty excited about it. And again, it's designed to help you get from point A to point B, but as intentionally as possible. But you have to come in and analyze it like you would with any output and decide, okay, what worked well with that? What would I modify? How would I make it my own? How would I make it better for myself and for my students?
Brett, if I could jump in for 1 second, I'm so glad that you mentioned that oftentimes when faculty are introduced to things like this, they think, oh, well, that was my thing. And, the thing to keep in mind is that your faculty experience and expertise is more valuable than it's ever been before, because these systems produce volume, but it's up to the person with disciplinary expertise to figure out, oh, that's going to work well for my class or that's not. in a way that Brett and I, from our own backgrounds, may not always know. But if you're a chemist and you're working on a chemistry class, you're going to know which of those things are going to fit for how you like to teach and the needs of your students.
Great. Yeah, and I like to say even you can even have AI amplify your expertise, because if it's
Yes.
doing some of the menial tasks, the developmental tasks for you, then you're really amplifying that expertise that brings about your special sauce, what you were trained to do best. So I love that. Thanks, Zach. The chat will be shared as part of the recap. I saw a request for that. Absolutely, because this community dialogue is so valuable. Hundreds of you and two of us up here. So we really value that and capture that and share that out. We can't do it all. We don't know it all up here. So thank you. So let's get you the link to the collection here if we don't already, or let's post it again, Kelly. Okay. And as always, we've got our recordings if you want to look back at any prior sessions that were mentioned by myself or Zach. We've got our playlist, and we've also got collated AI resources that we maintain at our website. That's been going on for 2.5 years now, so there's quite an extensive list of resources there. All right, we'll close it up, and we actually did it on time. And I want to, before everybody leaves, is thank Zach and acknowledge him. Always amazing working with you, and I appreciate the viewpoint you bring and your experience and the hard work that you do, the good work that you do.
Hey, thanks so much. It's always great to join this team. And I forgot what a pleasure it is to see the chat in real time. It's just what a great community.